Now, we're all facing the pressure of rising costs, and so too are the royal.
At 9:15 on a gray March morning in 2026, Prince William executed the swift financial neutralization of Queen Camilla. No press statements, no public warnings. He simply cut off her operational stipends, private staff allowances, and discretionary funds. The move came 48 hours after a cornered Prince Andrew drove through the back gates of Highgrove to hand King Charles a black leather ledger, exposing a secret 12-year financial network Camilla had quietly built right under the monarch's nose. The black ledger at Highgrove A, dark Range Rover, turned off the main road near Tetbury at 11:40 p.m. on March 4, 2026. It did not use the principal gates of Highgrove House, avoiding the main security lodge entirely. Instead, the vehicle swung onto a narrow gravel track running alongside the western perimeter wall. The car idled quietly before coming to a complete stop near the orchard gate. The security cameras covering that specific stretch of stone wall operated on a 6-second rotation blind spot. The driver knew that gap intimately because he had used it for decades during late-night estate visits. The man who stepped out of the rear passenger seat was Prince Andrew. He wore a heavy dark coat with no royal insignia or police protection detail in sight. He entered the estate grounds on foot, carrying a worn, water-stained black leather binder under his left arm. 10 minutes later, he walked directly into the ground floor study of King Charles. The room was warm and smelled of beeswax and wood smoke as the monarch sat at his flat-top mahogany desk. Beside a brass reading lamp rested a historic 1948 sterling silver inkwell, once owned by King George VI. The sovereign looked utterly exhausted, sitting in his embroidered flannel dressing gown. Stacks of medical charts and daily scheduling papers from the Lord Chamberlain's office sat near his left elbow. His daily administrative routines were strictly managed by a small group of senior palace aides. Almost all of those aides had been placed in their positions by Queen Camilla. The king assumed a valet was entering the study with evening medication until a heavy leather binder landed on his green blotter. Andrew stood over the desk with a cold expression, offering no formal greeting to his sick brother. "You need to read this," Andrew said quietly, pointing at the black binder resting beside the silver inkwell. "It is my survival, and if you have any sense left, it is yours too." The relationship between the two brothers had reached a breaking point over the eviction notices at Royal Lodge. Andrew had lived in the 30-room mansion in Windsor Great Park since 23 under a 75-year lease with the Crown Estate. The king wanted him out to streamline royal property holdings and satisfy the treasury. However, Andrew knew the true pressure was coming directly from Camilla. Camilla had quietly lobbied the king to cut Andrew's security funding and terminate his maintenance stipends. She wanted every trace of past scandals erased before any future crown restructuring took place. Andrew realized he could not fight her through public relations because he lacked public support. Instead, he activated personal contacts across private banking sectors in London and Geneva. In early 2025, he hired a forensic accounting firm in Mayfair to audit royal commercial entities over the past 12 years. On March 3rd, his team uncovered the master paper trail. The king adjusted his reading glasses and pulled the heavy binder across the mahogany desk. On page 22 sat a corporate registration filing from the Cayman Islands General Registry. The document listed an offshore entity named Bauer and Crest Holdings Limited. The primary trustee was Simon Martin, the personal solicitor who had managed Camilla's private family assets for decades. The filing revealed that international licensing royalties for Highgrove organic products had been quietly redirected away from the Prince of Wales's charitable fund since 2020. The public charity monitored by the Charity Commission was supposed to receive all commercial profits from estate brands. Instead, sub-licensing agreements granted overseas trademark rights in North America and East Asia to Bauer and Crest Holdings Limited. Over 6 years, £8 million in commercial royalties bypassed the inland revenue entirely. The offshore trust was set up to benefit Camilla's non-royal children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. The document bore a witness signature from a former Duchy of Lancaster administrator who resigned in 2024 to move to Dubai. Internal routing logs from Coates & Co. showed steady monthly wire transfers flowing directly into a private bank branch in Zurich. Andrew explained that if his eviction went forward on March 10th, a duplicate dossier would be delivered to Kensington Palace. That copy would land directly on the desk of Prince William. The king panicked and immediately placed a call to Camilla at Clarence House, canceling her upcoming public trip to York. He demanded an emergency confrontation at Buckingham Palace the following morning to inspect her private accounts. As the phone call ended, the king sat alone in the quiet study with his head resting in his hands. He realized that defending his wife meant risking a total constitutional exposure that could ruin his reign. The stress of his illness combined with this discovery felt almost unbearable. He knew that if this paper trail reached the British press, the public outrage over royal finances would destroy the credibility of the crown overnight. He stared at the ledger, realizing his brother had trapped him in a corner with no easy escape. Meanwhile, Andrew stepped back into his waiting vehicle and placed a quick phone call to an encrypted line. The call connected directly to 103 Pall Mall. The administrative headquarters of the Andrew confirmed that the secondary dossier was already moving toward William's inner circle, ensuring the financial confrontation would explode by dawn. He hung up the phone and leaned back against his leather seat, watching the dark countryside pass by. He knew Prince William would act with brutal efficiency the moment those documents crossed his desk. The ghost in the monarchy's bank account. The heavy rain had eased to a steady drizzle when King Charles stepped into his private car at dawn on March 5th. The morning air was cold, smelling of wet earth and diesel exhaust, as the engine turned over near the main courtyard of the estate. He held the black binder firmly on his lap with both hands. He did not speak to his driver or his protection officers during the entire 90-minute drive towards central London. By 8 o'clock, the car pulled into the secluded rear entrance of Buckingham Palace. The wide stone corridors were strangely quiet, populated only by early shift housekeepers and security personnel. The sovereign walked straight to his private suite on the first floor overlooking the gardens. He placed the binder on a heavy oak table near the window and sat down to wait. Across the city, at Kensington Palace, a messenger arrived at the security gate carrying a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. The package was addressed directly to Prince William. It was routed through the internal mail distribution room without passing through standard press office filters. The security team logged the package at 8:15 and placed it on the desk inside the heir's private office. William entered his office 20 minutes later, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. He noticed the red wax seal immediately because that specific mark belonged to a legal firm that had previously represented his late uncle's estate. He set his coffee down on a coaster and picked up a silver letter opener from his desk tray. When he sliced the envelope open, 26 pages of audited financial spreadsheets tumbled out onto his blotter. Attached to the front was a handwritten note signed with a single initial. The note read simply, "Check the offshore routing numbers against the Duchy tenant assistance logs from 2022. William pulled his chair up to the desk and began cross-referencing the transaction numbers on his laptop screen. He opened the official registry of the Duchy of Cornwall, the vast private estate that funds the heir to the throne. Within 5 minutes, his eyes locked onto a series of agricultural development grants that had been approved 4 years earlier. The grants totaled nearly £3 million and were earmarked for sustainable farming initiatives in Somerset. However, the receiving entity was not a local farming cooperative. The funds had been wired to a corporate account managed by a firm called Amesbury Heritage Management. William opened a secondary browser tab to search the corporate filings of Amesbury Heritage Management. The company was registered at a commercial address in Bristol. The sole director listed on the filing was a former business partner of Tom Parker Bowles. The heir to the throne felt a sudden wave of sharp focus take over his mind. This was not a minor accounting error or an administrative overlap. It was a direct, unauthorized bleed of duchy resources into a private commercial venture tied directly to his stepmother's family. He picked up his desk phone and dialed the direct line for his chief financial officer, who was currently working out of the administrative offices at 103 Pall Mall. "I need you in my office right now," William said. "Bring the master ledger for the tenant loan guarantees from 2022 through 2025. "Is there an issue with the quarterly review, sir?" the officer asked over the line. "No," William replied firmly. There is an issue with £3 million that left our agricultural fund and landed in a private holding company in Bristol. While William was assembling his legal team, Queen Camilla arrived at Buckingham Palace through a side entrance. She wore a dark tailored suit and carried a small leather handbag. Her expression was hard, her jaw set tight as she walked down the long corridor toward the king's suite. She opened the door without knocking and closed it quietly behind her. The king was still sitting near the window, staring down at the open pages of the Black Ledger. "Charles," she said, standing near the door, "we need to talk about this calmly before you make a decision that cannot be undone." The king did not look up from the table. He pointed a long finger at a specific line entry printed on page 34. "Did you authorize this transfer?" Charles asked. His voice was flat, completely drained of emotional warmth. "That was a private commercial arrangement negotiated by my legal team," Camilla replied, stepping closer to the table. "It had nothing to do with public money or state funds." "It used the Highgrove trademark," the king said, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. "That trademark belongs to a registered public trust. You diverted £8 million over 6 years into an offshore account in the Caribbean." "I did what any mother would do," Camilla said coldly. "Your son inherits the entire crown estate and the Duchy of Cornwall. Harry has his own private wealth from his mother. What do my children get when you pass away, Charles?" The question hung in the quiet room like a physical weight. The king stared at his wife, stunned by the bluntness of her response. "They get nothing from the state," Camilla continued, her voice rising slightly. "They receive no public stipends. They have no official protection. They have spent 15 years being hunted by the press simply because I married you. I ensured they would have financial security. You used my brand to do it," the king said. "You used my estate. If the Inland Revenue sees these filings, it will be classified as tax evasion. The accounts are held under legal offshore structures," she countered. "Everything was vetted by senior counsel. It is completely legal." "It is not morally defensible," Charles said. "And if Andrew leaks this to the newspapers, the public will not care about the legal technicalities. They will see a queen consort using the monarchy to enrich her family." Before Camilla could answer, the door to the suite opened abruptly. Prince William walked into the room without waiting for an announcement from the royal attendants stationed outside. He carried a thick leather folder under his arm, his face completely devoid of expression. He looked at his father, then turned his gaze directly toward Camilla. "It is worse than you think," William said, placing his folder on the table right beside Andrew's Black Ledger. The king looked startled by his son's unexpected arrival. "William, how did you get in here? What are you talking about?" "Andrew sent a duplicate copy to my office this morning," William said, leaning over the table. "I spent the last 2 hours with my financial directors checking the routing numbers against our own accounts." He flipped open his folder and pulled out a series of printed bank transfers stamped with the official seal of the Duchy of Cornwall. "She didn't just use Highgrove," William said, pointing a finger at a highlighted transaction line. "She used my agricultural development funds as loan guarantees to secure private credit lines for her son's business expansions." Camilla's face went completely pale. She took a step back toward the fireplace, her hand gripping the edge of her handbag tightly. "That was a temporary backing arrangement," Camilla said defensively. "The credit line was never drawn down. The duchy did not lose a single penny." "You used the assets of the Duchy of Cornwall without my knowledge or consent," William said. His voice was low, sharp, and tightly controlled. "That is a breach of the Duchy Charter of 1337. He turned away from her and looked directly at his father. "This stops today," William declared. "I am freezing every discretionary stipend, every office allowance, and every security contribution paid to her office through the Duchy framework." The king stood up from his chair, holding out his hands in a gesture of restraint. "William, wait. We need to handle this internally. We cannot take drastic measures without a full legal audit." "The audit is already happening," William replied coldly. "My team at Pall Mall is locking the accounts as we speak. By noon today, every corporate credit card assigned to her private staff will be deactivated." "You cannot do that," Camilla said, her voice trembling with anger. "I am the queen consort. You have no legal authority to cut my operational budget." "I have absolute authority over the Duchy of Cornwall," William shot back, standing straight and looking down at her. "The money that pays your private staff comes from my estate." You will not receive another pound until every penny diverted to Bauer and Crest is returned to the public trust." The room descended into a tense, suffocating silence. The king looked back and forth between his wife and his son, completely trapped in the middle of a war he could not control. "What about Andrew?" Charles asked softly. "He has the original documents. He is threatening to go to the press if his eviction is not stopped." William turned toward the window, looking out over the gray expanse of the palace gardens. "Andrew thinks he holds the cards," William said. "He thinks this gives him leverage to keep Royal Lodge, but he forgets one basic fact." He turned back to face his father and Camilla, his eyes cold and unyielding. "I don't care about protecting Andrew, and I don't care about protecting her," William said. "If Andrew wants to burn down the house, let him try, but I will secure the estate's money before the fire starts." He picked up his folder from the table, leaving Andrew's black ledger sitting in the center of the room. "You have until 5 o'clock to sign the formal release of the offshore assets," William added, looking directly at Camilla. "If those funds are not transferred back to the public charity by the end of the day, I will hand these files to the Treasury auditors myself." Without another word, Prince William turned and walked out of the suite, leaving the heavy oak door open behind him. The king sank back down into his chair, looking aged and broken in the gray morning light. He looked up at Camilla, who remained standing by the fireplace, her face frozen in shock. The financial lines had been drawn. The illusion of family unity was completely shattered, and inside the corridors of Buckingham Palace, the battle for control of the monarchy's wealth had just officially begun. 8 minutes at 103 Pall Mall. A black cab pulled up to the curb outside 103 Pall Mall at precisely 9:45 on March 6th. The heavy brass-handled doors of the Duchy of Cornwall office opened as Prince William walked in. He did not pause to greet the receptionist in the front hall. He walked straight up the main staircase to the second-floor conference room overlooking St. James's Park. Inside the room, 4 senior financial directors sat waiting around a dark oval table. Laptops were open, and stacks of printouts lay organized beside leather folders. The Duchy treasurer stood near the white marble fireplace holding a red binder. Nobody offered a greeting as the heir to the throne entered and took his seat at the head of the table. "The freeze needs to take effect immediately," William said, opening his notepad. "I want every discretionary account linked to the Queen Consort's private office locked before noon. That includes event allowances, travel stipends, and administrative support." The treasurer nodded once and pulled a paper from his binder. "The legal authorization rests on Section 14 of the Duchy Management Act of 1982. As Duke of Cornwall, you hold unilateral authority over estate revenue allocations. However, stopping her operational budget will cause an immediate administrative breakdown at Clarence House." "Let it break," William replied flatly. "They have been using our agricultural tenant guarantees to underwrite private loans. I am not running a venture capital fund for her family." The room remained completely quiet for several seconds. The accountants looked down at their screens, processing the order. A senior auditor sitting at the far end of the table cleared his throat and slid a thin yellow folder across the mahogany wood toward the prince. "There is another issue, sir," the auditor said. "While reviewing the offshore accounts flagged in the dossier, we ran a cross-check on property manifests from Windsor Castle." William pulled the yellow folder closer. Inside was a copy of an International Customs Declaration form dated November 14, 2025. The document was filed with a specialized vault facility in Geneva. It listed an uncatalogued piece of historic royal jewelry, a 19th century sapphire and diamond tie pin once owned by King Edward VII. The declared value was £400,000. The tie pin was not private property. It was part of an uncatalogued historical collection held in trust at Windsor. It had been officially listed as out for restoration by an independent jeweler in Bond Street since early 2024. "Why is an estate asset sitting in a Swiss vault?" William asked, his eyes scanning the customs stamp. "It was pledged as secondary collateral," the auditor explained softly. "A holding company linked to Tom Parker Bowles used the physical asset to secure a private credit facility with a Zurich bank. The paperwork was signed by an archivist working under the Queen's direction." William closed the folder with a sharp snap. The mystery of how Camilla's family secured high-value commercial loans without placing their own property on the line was solved. They were using uncatalogued Crown heritage items as quiet financial backing. "Call the Lord Chamberlain's office," William instructed his legal counsel. "Tell them to initiate an immediate physical audit of every vault in Windsor. If a single piece is missing, file a formal notice with the Metropolitan Police Art and Antiques Unit." "Sir, if we involve the police, it becomes public record," the lawyer warned. "The press will pick up the filing within hours." "Then she has 2 hours to get that tie pin back to Windsor," William said, leaning forward. "Send the customs copy directly to her private secretary at Clarence House." While the legal team began drafting the formal freeze orders, William stood up and walked over to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving wet streaks across the tall glass. He knew this move would force his father into an unbearable corner. The king was already struggling with his health, and a public feud between his wife and his heir would dominate the national headlines for months. Yet, William felt no hesitation. The integrity of the estate was his sole responsibility. The Duchy of Cornwall was designed to sustain the monarchy for generations, not to fund private lifestyle safety nets. At 10:15, the treasurer hit the final confirmation key on his laptop terminal. A system notification flashed across the screen, confirming that all secondary banking credentials assigned to the Queen Consort's administrative team had been revoked. Across town, at Clarence House, the administrative shock hit almost instantly. A junior staff member in the finance department tried to process a routine payment for a private catering firm. The system returned an error code: account access, suspended by a state authority. 2 minutes later, Camilla's private secretary received a high-priority encrypted email from 103 Pall Mall. Attached was the formal notice of funding suspension alongside the customs declaration form from Geneva. The secretary walked down the hallway to Camilla's private drawing room, carrying the printed page on a silver tray. He placed the paper on the small table beside her chair without saying a word. Camilla picked up the sheet and read the bold heading at the top. Her face tightened as she recognized the Swiss vault stamp at the bottom of the page. She knew instantly that her time for quiet negotiations had ended. William was not bluffing. He was systematically dismantling her entire private financial network, brick by brick. She picked up her desk phone and dialed the private line for Highgrove House. When the king's personal valet answered, her voice was cold and demanding. "Tell the king I am on my way to Windsor," Camilla said, "and tell him to have Prince William in the room when I arrive." The silent alarm at Clarence House. A florist delivery van pulled up to the security barrier behind Clarence House at 12:20. The driver handed an invoice for £2,100 to the duty officer inside the guard booth. The officer swiped the corporate procurement card assigned to the Queen's household operations. The terminal screen chimed twice, flashing a bright red rejection message across the digital display. The officer tried the card a second time, thinking the machine had simply dropped its network connection. The transaction failed again, returning a specific system error code linked to restricted accounts. Within 5 minutes, similar transaction rejections hit the catering department and the private transport office. The entire operational pipeline running through the Queen Consort staff had effectively frozen. Down the hall, inside her private study, Queen Camilla stood near a tall window, holding a printed sheet of paper. Her private secretary had just delivered the Swiss customs declaration form, alongside an official letter from the Duchy of Cornwall. The document confirmed that the Edward VII sapphire tie pin was currently flagged on an international asset monitoring system. The legal exposure was no longer theoretical. It was an active liability. The door to the study opened as her lead personal advisor stepped inside, carrying a blue legal folder. He set the folder on her mahogany desk and opened it to a draft property agreement. The document was an unsigned charter drafted at her personal estate, Ray Mill House, in late 2025. The paperwork sought to reclassify several uncatalogued heritage items as private gifts rather than crown assets. "Where did you get this?" Camilla asked, turning away from the window. "This was kept in the private safe at Wiltshire. Duchy security officers entered the property at 9 o'clock this morning," the advisor replied quietly. "They carried a legal order signed under emergency estate preservation protocols. They cleared the desk printer tray and took every draft document related to asset reclassification." The speed of the operation caught her completely off guard. Prince William was not waiting for court discussions or family negotiations. He was executing a systematic legal sweep across every property linked to her name. By seizing the draft charter at Ray Mill House, his team had secured proof that her advisors were actively trying to move Crown assets into private trusts. She sat down at her desk, picked up her telephone, and dialed the direct line to the private secretary at Royal Lodge. Prince Andrew answered the call on the second ring. His voice sounded surprisingly calm, almost cheerful, despite the weather and the crisis unfolding around them. "You think you won something by taking that binder to Highgrove?" Camilla said into the receiver. "You haven't saved your house, Andrew. You have given William the excuse he needed to take control of everything." "I saved myself," Andrew replied flatly. "You spent 3 years trying to push me out of Windsor to clean up the public image. You wanted my lease canceled so you could secure your own family's financial future before Charles grew too weak to defend you. I simply leveled the playing field." "William is freezing every asset in sight," she shot back, gripping the phone tightly. "He won't spare you once he finishes with my accounts. You gave him the ammunition." "William knows I have nothing left to lose," Andrew said. "He knows if he touches my tenancy now, that ledger goes to every national newspaper in Great Britain. He is smart enough to focus on the person who actually took the money." The line went dead as Andrew hung up. Camilla dropped the phone back onto its cradle, her hands visibly unsteady. She realized her leverage was entirely gone. Andrew was content to watch the building burn around them as long as his lease remained untouched, and William possessed the legal power to starve her operations indefinitely. 10 minutes later, her car left Clarence House, heading west toward Berkshire. She had arranged an emergency meeting at Windsor Castle, where King Charles was currently resting in his private apartments. She needed her husband to exercise his royal prerogative and override his son's financial orders before the news broke to the wider press. When her motorcade arrived at the castle gates, the guards cleared her through without delay. But as she walked into the hallway leading to the king's suite, she found 2 senior legal advisors from the Lord Chamberlain's office standing outside the door. They held a stack of leather-bound inventory ledgers dating back to 1952. The audit had already begun. The accountants were actively verifying every historic item in the collection room. The palace was no longer operating on trust. It was operating on forensic proof. She pushed past the advisors and entered the room. The king was sitting near a stone fireplace wrapped in a blanket, looking smaller and far more fragile than he had at Highgrove the previous night. "Charles," she said, stepping toward him, "you have to order William to stop this. His lawyers are raiding Ray Mill House." The king looked up slowly, his eyes tired and devoid of anger. He looked at his wife, then pointed to a single sheet of paper sitting on the small tea table beside his chair. "I signed the authorization for the audit 20 minutes ago," Charles said softly. "It is over, Camilla. We cannot fight our own estate." The Windsor Vault confrontation. Prince William unrolled a large floor map of the South Library across the long mahogany table at Windsor. His hands were steady as he weighted the corners down with 4 heavy crystal paperweights. King Charles sat in a high-backed armchair near the radiator, holding a mug of herbal tea. Queen Camilla stood 3 feet away from the table, refusing to sit down or look at her stepson. The legal reality of the situation had crystallized over the previous 4 hours. Under the terms of the Sovereign Grant Act of 2012, public funding for royal duties requires strict annual reporting to Parliament. Private family assets managed under offshore holding structures do not fall under parliamentary oversight. However, using Crown heritage items as commercial loan, collateral crosses directly into statutory financial violations. William reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper stamped by a commercial bank in Geneva. He dropped it onto the center of the estate map, right over the outline of the castle vaults. "The Swiss bank released the hold on the sapphire tie pin 30 minutes ago," William said. "The loan facility secured by your son's company has been officially closed. The pin is back in the custody of our diplomatic courier in Zurich." Camilla crossed her arms, her face tightening as she looked at her husband. "Then the matter is resolved. The item is safe, no public funds were spent, and the records can be updated quietly." "It is not resolved," William replied. "The offshore entity, Bauer and Crest Holdings Limited, still holds £8 million in diverted Highgrove organic licensing revenues. That money belongs to the public charity, not to your family trusts." He slid a second document across the table toward the king. It was a formal legal surrender agreement drafted by duchy attorneys earlier that afternoon. The terms were absolute. Every offshore asset linked to the commercial licensing scheme had to be transferred back to the Prince of Wales's charitable fund by midnight. If Camilla signed, her operational stipends would be quietly restored under strict duchy oversight. If she refused, William would order a complete forensic audit of all estate accounts, triggering a public government inquiry. The king set his tea down on a side table, his hands visibly trembling. He looked at the document, then up at his wife. "You have to sign it, Camilla," Charles said quietly. "We cannot survive a public audit. The institution cannot take another hit." Camilla looked at the king, realization dawning on her face. Her husband was not going to protect her. Facing the combined weight of William's financial authority and Charles's physical exhaustion, she had no moves left on the board. She reached down, picked up a pen from the table, and signed her name on the bottom line. William took the signed document, folded it twice, and placed it inside his leather folder. "The offshore accounts will be liquidated by Friday. Your staff allowances will resume on Monday under my treasurer's direct supervision." He turned toward the door, stopping briefly as a new thought crossed his mind. He looked back at his father, sitting by the radiator. "What about Andrew?" the king asked softly. "He still has the original bank ledgers at Royal Lodge." "Andrew got what he wanted," William said flatly. "He proved he could cause chaos. But he also proved he is too dangerous to ever bring back into the public fold. His lease remains untouched, but he stays behind his gates permanently." William opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the quiet stone corridor, leaving his father and stepmother alone in the vast room. The immediate crisis was over, but the underlying balance of power inside the monarchy had fundamentally changed forever. The new guard orders, the books. A moving van left the rear yard of Clarence House at 4 o'clock on July 25, 2026. Inside were 18 boxes of private accounting ledgers, digital storage drives, and historical correspondence files. The destination was not a private legal office or a bank vault. The truck drove directly to the administrative archives at the Duchy of Cornwall headquarters. By late afternoon, 3 senior advisors who had managed Queen Camilla's personal household affairs surrendered their security passes at the palace guardhouse. Their contracts were officially terminated under a corporate restructuring initiative directed by Prince William. The administrative independence her team enjoyed for over a decade was formally brought to an end. The structural changes went far beyond staffing shifts. The offshore firm in the Cayman Islands was officially dissolved under the supervision of independent forensic auditors. Every penny of the redirected licensing profits was absorbed back into registered Crown Heritage funds. The commercial rights to estate products were placed under a unified governance board managed directly by duchy accountants. King Charles spent the remainder of the summer resting at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, largely removed from daily estate management decisions. His health required a lighter workload, leaving the operational direction of the monarchy in the hands of his heir. The quiet transfer of institutional authority had effectively accelerated, driven by the financial crisis rather than a formal coronation. Down at Windsor Great Park, the security gates at Royal Lodge remained closed. Prince Andrew kept his home, but his victory was hollow. The physical barrier surrounding his residence became his permanent boundary, with no remaining path back to public life or family reconciliation. He had traded his remaining family loyalty for a lease agreement. Yet, as the new financial management system took effect across the royal properties, one lingering question remained unanswered inside the treasurer's office. A final audit of the private accounts revealed an unidentified wire transfer of £200,000 made in early 2024. The funds had been sent from a private foundation account to an undisclosed recipient in New York. The transaction carried no corporate label, no witness signature, and no attached invoice. The money had simply vanished into an anonymous account just months before the broader financial investigation began. William reviewed the single-page transfer query during his final evening briefing in London. He signed an order to keep the file open, placing the document inside his personal desk safe. The immediate battle over the Queen's funding was over, but the full story of the palace's hidden accounts was far from finished. Prince William proved he will not hesitate to use absolute financial authority to protect the future of the monarchy. But did he cross a line by stripping the Queen's private office? Or was it the only way to eliminate decades of palace corruption? Did Prince Andrew finally find a way to strike back? Or did he accidentally hand William the key to total control over the royal family's wealth?